friends are synths.
Let me begin by telling you a story. Back in 2016, I bought a Dreadbox Hades. This was a monophonic bass synthesizer that came out not long after the Erebus, which I loved, and I have done a video on fairly recently. Now, for various reasons, despite using both the Erebus and the Hades a fair bit in my early creations, at some point down the line, I kind of foolishly decided to sell them. The Hades ended up going all the way to a producer called Gene Kennedy in New Zealand, but unfortunately when it arrived down under, he told me that it had gotten damaged in transit. Now that was something of an understatement, as it turned out that the entire synth was basically smashed to smithereens. It really looked like a truck had driven over it or something, maybe fallen off the back of the lorry and, someone reversed over it. The whole casing was caved in, the wooden end cheeks were all broken off and splintered. The components themselves were snapped. It seemed, unfortunately, like it was basically a total write-off. Now, we got it all sorted out through eBay and Gene got a refund and everything else. However, Gene is not the sort of person to give up easily, and between him and his dad, they made significant repairs to the synth to try and get it up and up and running again. Dreadbox initially sent them out spare parts, and then actually put the synth back together in Athens for free, which definitely goes well beyond the warranty. Now, once it all was said and done, Gene had effectively a brand new Hades synthesizer along with a pretty cool history. Now, the reason I'm telling you all of this is partly to give you an idea of my personal legacy or history with the Hades, but also to demonstrate just how cool a company Dreadbox are. There aren't too many out there that would have done something like that. You just need to look at the approach teenage engineering take, for example, to appreciate why this matters and why it's such a big deal. The bottom line for me is that Dreadbox not only make good stuff, but they also genuinely care about their longevity, and that deserves some respect. Anyway, the original Hades has now been reissued by Dreadbox, similar to what they've done with the Erebus, and also, more recently, the Nyx, both of which I've either done videos on or will be doing videos on shortly, depending on when you watch this, I guess. In many respects, the Hades is largely the same as the original, albeit with a slightly different case, and the use of surface mount rather than through-hole components. There are some functional differences between the versions, but as far as I can tell, these are effectively just limited to the format of the connections, as opposed to anything substantive about the sound or circuit necessarily. Now here I should note that I'm specifically comparing the reissue to the original, as the DIY version that was released a while back was functionally a bit different, so bear that in mind. Specifically though, the reissue is now USB powered and takes one of those big printer style cables rather than requiring a dedicated 15-volt DC wall supply of the original. Both the audio output and MIDI input are now in the front panel rather than on the rear of the unit, and they now both use mini jack connections as opposed to 1/4-inch jack and 5-pin DIN respectively. These changes are kind of a mixed bag, to be honest. I actually really like having USB power on there, as it helps standardise things a bit, and it means one less thing you have to plug into an adapter in the wall, though I'm not a huge fan of the use of mini jack, as you'll know from my previous video on the topic. With MIDI I can kind of get over it, but it is a bit annoying when it comes to audio output, since I'm recording directly into an interface which has got 1/4-inch jack connections, and to be honest, my mono adapters are pretty crap. Though I guess that isn't really the fault of Dreadbox after all, and I should probably just bite the bullet and buy some better quality adapters. To be fair, I do understand why Dreadbox have chosen to go down this route, as you can now remove Hades from its chassis and mount it as a Eurorack module. Having the output on mini jack allows better compatibility with modular gear as well, and the positioning of the connections also means that you can stack the collection vertically, which is useful in constricted spaces. I've personally got some modular locky stands which are made out of wood, and you can change their construction and rearrange them to fit whatever you need. And the Hades works really nicely on them with the Erebus on top. So whilst there's something of a curmudgeon, is that how you pronounce that? Let's just say it is. I still love the format of the originals with their wooden end cheeks because they look beautiful. This design is perfectly fine as well. There's nothing really I can complain about. So in the box you get a ribbon cable for Eurorack power, as well as a TRS mini jack and MIDI adapter, though there isn't a USB cable or any patch cables to speak of, so you have to supply your own, which I think is probably fair enough at this point. We've all got drawers full of these cables kicking about, particularly the USB ones. In terms of features, in here you've got one oscillator, which is either off or switchable between square wave and sawtooth. On top of that though, we've got two sub-oscillators, which help give it some serious extra heft. One of these is set to be an octave down and the other is set to be 2 octaves down, and you can mix the levels of these to taste, as well as apply some pulse width modulation to thicken things up even more should you need or desire that. There is a glide control for making things a wee bit slippery. And a patch bay to let you interface with other modular gear, or just get a bit more creative with your patches if using it standalone. There is a VCA that is paired with a straightforward attack release or AR envelope, and a rather growly 3-pole 18 decibel low pass filter, which is paired with an ADSR or ADR envelope. This lets you get some really squelchy acid style sounds, which I am very much in favour of. Dreadbox desktop synthesizers are known for their inclusion of specific characterful effects, such as, the Erebus with the delay, and Hades is no exception. The VCA has got an OTA drive circuit built in, which is applied after the filter to give it some real extra oomph, and it really does actually make a difference at warming things up quite nicely, though you need to kind of ride the volume to make sure that you're not just blasting your speakers when you turn up the drive, so be aware of that. I think it can be really easy to underestimate this synthesizer. I know that I certainly did when it had the original. The design and feature set seems so straightforward that it might appear fairly limited, especially in comparison to other bits of gear with, all of their bells and whistles. However, now that I know a fair bit more than I did back then, I can appreciate both its versatility and just how good it sounds. Yeah, okay, it doesn't have the immediately accessible range that a digital synth would, but then this isn't a digital synth, it's an analog monophonic bass synth. And when you begin to dig into it a bit and plate its strengths, you discover that this thing can roar in a way that digital synthesizers could only ever dream of. That is especially true when you start utilising the patch bay, sending the LFO into the pulse wave modulation input, for example, and just cranking the rate, and that thing sounds fucking excellent. You can, of course, use Hades in higher registers for leads or even pads, though be aware that the upper end of the responsive MIDI octave range taps out at a lower point than you would, perhaps find on a quote-unquote regular synthesizer. It is meant to be a bass synthesizer after all. One thing I've found myself doing at times is just using the Hades to provide atmospheric sounds, patching the gate into the envelope to create a kind of hold, and then sweeping the filter at quite high resonance, which helps give some bulk, but also movement in the background of tracks where you just need a wee bit something else. So that's a top tip for you there. I've got to say that I think it's really pretty cool that Dreadbox have been re-releasing their classic synths like this, in line with their shift to surface mount components. These were some of the devices that I was most excited about getting when I was first dabbling with desktop units, and they are quite special, each in their own way. Dedicated analog bass synthesizers like this, in particular, are still kind of uncommon, in that there aren't a huge number of them about on the market, and it's good to see Hades back and available, especially as folks realise just what they're capable of, or perhaps as I realise what they're capable of. As usual, a bunch of the loops and things I've recorded for this video and all of my others are available on Patreon. So if you sign up below, you can go download all of that stuff. It makes a big difference and it means a lot, as I don't really do things in a way that encourages the algorithm to look upon me favourably. So thank you. If you're interested in this, you might also be interested in my video on the Erebus reissue or the Nix, which you can find a link to somewhere here or here or here. You know how YouTube works. Until next time, Kalisinechia.